and I'm really excited to welcome you to our panel for the summit, which is on the topic of, can spiritual solutions fix economic problems? We've got some opinions in the audience. We are going to hear from 4 esteemed panelists this evening. I'm going to introduce them one by one. I'd like to invite you to give them a warm welcome. So first and foremost, we have Dr. Joy DeGruy, internationally renowned author, educator, and founder of Be the Healing, Inc., who we just heard from with our fireside chat with Jenna. Thank you, Joy, and welcome back to the stage. Joining us next is Neal Harmon, CEO and co-founder of Angel Studios. Angel Studios is a media company and a film studio that tells stories that amplify light. And Neal will actually be also joining us for a fireside chat tomorrow, so we'll get to hear a little bit more about his personal story. And third, we have Saman Farid, who is the founder and CEO of Formic Technologies, a company that's at the forefront of revolutionizing automation in manufacturing. And last but not least, we have Layli Miller-Muro, social impact entrepreneur, human rights expert, and principal at Miller-Muro Consulting, helping leaders and organizations turn platitudes into practices and translate good intentions into positive impact. Thank you so much for joining us today. Amazing panel. Now, we have heard a lot over these last 2 days around this topic of spirituality, but also the state of affairs of the world that we're living in. A world in which there's huge and incredible economic upheaval. We see, if we take a look at the events of the world around us, so many of our speakers have spoken to this, but even in tech itself, we had, say, last year, the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. Big questions around the role of tech, risk, regulation, the failure of financial systems. In Hollywood, we've had the labor unions boycotting because of ability for workers to be creative in an industry where AI is automating a lot of human creativity, and questions of what is the future of work, what is the future of human value and contribution, and what is going to happen when a lot of the systems, the economic systems that are before us, are actually perhaps failing us. Now, some people say they're failing us. Joy, you reminded us that perhaps they're working exactly as they were designed to in a capitalist system. And at the same time, we're seeing these really interesting movements around consciousness, environmental consciousness, conscious capitalism, movements around shared value, and ways of bringing spiritual principles into our economic enterprises. When I think about spirituality, I think for some of us it could be religious, but for many of us, it's not necessarily of a religious origin. It can also be for those of us who are non-religious and spiritual. But this idea of our interconnectedness, and this idea that with the principles of love, justice, shared value, long-term thinking, that we can actually not just see humans as those to be exploited for economic good, but of actually providing real value to society. So with that having been said, a lot of people are looking to spiritual principles and solutions. Can these spiritual principles actually solve the vastness of the economic crises before us? And so I want to go straight to the core question here, which is, can spiritual solutions fix the economic problems before us?
I absolutely believe that that's how it's going to have to happen. Ultimately, it is going to be a spiritual solution. I just think we tend to simplify what that means. Operationalizing that reality is the creative part of it that we have to deal with. But yes, I think that's ultimately what is going to answer the major social problems of the world.
Neal, do you agree?
Hello? Yes, I agree. I think spiritual solutions can fix economic problems. I think that the most successful economic endeavors are successful because they tap into true principles. And from the Google search algorithm that was worked on at Stanford. They were solving a problem around search, and they tapped into this idea of people linking to the most important information, and then they were able to find better information. And at Angel Studios, we have decided that instead of very few people in Hollywood deciding what gets greenlit, we let the audience decide what should be greenlit, and we let them see and vote on the shows that we're considering, and we take the ones with the highest score. And we think that tapping into a true principle or into better information that better represents what people need and what people's desires are. There was a survey done by HarrisX last year around what people want more in their media, and people want more faith in their media. They want more hope. They want more inspiration. They want less war. They want less conflict. And if we allow the people to decide, then we will get closer to the truth than we do by just having a few executives decide. And so now, is that a spiritual principle? I think so one of the things that Angel has done to tie closer to a spiritual principle is we've set a North Star, which is stories that are true, honest, noble, just, authentic, lovely, admirable, and excellent. And then we let the audience decide what that means. They vote on it, and then they decide, and then we believe that we'll have better storytelling as a result of doing that. So that's a concrete example of how we've tried to implement something closer to the truth.
I love that example of participatory decision-making, definitely as a spiritual principle that you're bringing into Angel, and would love to hear more about that as we go. Saman, you're running your own tech company, AI-focused, very capitalistic society in terms of the venture capital you've raised as well. How does what you're doing fit into this question around spiritual solutions to economic problems? We know that AI is getting a lot of flack as well.
Yeah, so I will be the face of bold-faced capitalism on the panel, I guess. But yeah, I mean, so the company that I run, we put robots in manufacturing facilities and help them increase their productivity. I think if I could modify the question a little bit, I would say, can spiritual solutions fix economic problems in a sustained way? Because I think economic problems are easy to fix for a moment, right? To momentarily solve an economic crisis, you could change the interest rates, you could, have government subsidies, you could do this, you could do that. There's a bunch of different levers that are available, and AI is obviously one of them that is kind of creating a massive amount of wealth. They all can create a ton of economic wealth, and we've seen that over the last 50 to 100 years economic wealth keeps pouring out of these spigots from technology and many other places, and yet kind of the fundamental issues facing society have not been solved. And so I think my belief is that without spiritual solutions, those economic solutions are only temporary in nature and often create more inequality than they solve.
So essentially you do agree.
Yes.
Excellent. And Layli, what about you?
So when you asked me this behind the stage, my answer was, it depends. And so to be annoying, and the lawyer in me, I would say, what is the problem that you're trying to fix? And my concern is that different people believe the economy is broken in different ways. And their belief in how it's broken depends on where they sit in the world and what lottery ticket they received when they were born, as other people have talked more eloquently about. So I do think that to understand what the problem is will have to be a deep spiritual process in and of itself, where humanity collectively, with great decision-making participation by those who are not normally making those decisions, have to have a voice in defining what the problem is. And when we have unity and dignity in defining what the problem is, or problems, I think it will be, then yes, spiritual principles can help solve that. I think if for no other reason, and people have talked very eloquently all throughout the last 2 days about many different spiritual principles that we can call ourselves to. But it feels to me like the most important element of spirituality that will transform us is the motivation for something higher than ourselves, and the intention that allows us to get outside of our selfishness and our greed and our myopic perspectives and see something greater and higher with humility and the knowledge that we are actually very insignificant as individuals.
You're speaking to the interconnectedness that we all experience and have as humans, having a common human experience. In terms of the economic problem you talked about, it depends how we define the problem at hand. Why don't we go straight to the system itself? Capitalism as a system. Is capitalism the problem, or is it the operation of it and some of the externalities and impacts that are the problem that we need to then go and remedy? Do we need to overthrow the system itself? Neal.
So Proverbs 23:23 says, "Buy the truth and do not sell it." And one of the greatest challenges to capitalism today is a misunderstanding of what it is. And some of the most, I'm familiar with art because of Angel Studios, and there's a book called The Fiat Standard. And in this book, the author describes how the greatest art in the history of the world has been made when there has been hard money. Hard money means money that is hard to create. And so in eras of gold as a money standard, there's more beautiful art because people are able to look longer term. They're able to think about the future. In eras where money is debased, then the art becomes more debauchery, more cynicism. It starts to reflect the fact that people are thinking shorter and shorter term. And the capitalist society in which we live today is based on a fiat system. And in that fiat system, the way that money is created is because of debt. So if you're familiar with when you go to get a loan from the bank, and the bank actually doesn't have the money to give you the loan because they use fractional reserve banking. They'll give you a loan, and then you're able to go buy a TV screen, or you're able to go buy a business, and you're buying it with money that it was created out of thin air. And that hasn't always been that way. The central banking system has been something that's been basically an experiment in the last 100 years or so. And, well, I mean, it's been experimented on before. But this idea of, in the Quran it says, to men is allotted what they earn, and to women what they earn. In the book of Isaiah, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression. In the book of Ezekiel, thus saith the Lord, put away violence and destruction, and practice justice and righteousness. Stop your expropriations from my people. So this idea that you can remove value from society is not truth. And so if I can take money and spend it on war through debasing the currency, that's not capitalism. Capitalism is that when someone works for something or builds something, they get to decide what to do with it. And they get to decide how to invest it. And so we have a quasi-capitalist system. It's a good system. It has worked well for the last 100 years, but most of the pain that people feel today doesn't relate to capitalism. It relates to the fiat system.
Thanks for that perspective. Joy, you spoke earlier about the fact that the system is operating as exactly as it was designed, and that slavery was in fact an economic solution within a capitalist system. How does that sit with this idea that actually capitalism is perhaps right now a quasi-system rather than operating as exactly as it was meant to be?
I don't know that it's a quasi-system. I think that the who is really important in terms of who is making the decisions, who is running it, who has the power. And I think the issue becomes is the idea of us as human beings and how we are exemplifying the principles, the virtues, those kinds of things. I think you can take a perfectly wonderful system and have a totally rotten person that's running it that destroys it. And I think the opposite is also true. I think you can take, and we talked about this also in the back, that what we do right now is we infiltrate systems. We infiltrate them. Every single one of us has to work within these systems in order to survive. And we're able to infiltrate those systems and do good work. It doesn't change the system, though. We do it in spite of it, not because of it. And so I believe that we have to be changed as human beings. When you, like people talk about faith, you quoted the Quran and you quoted a number of scriptures. And one of the scriptures in the Quran, it may even be a hadith, and it said, for a righteous man avoids doubtful matters. Doubtful matters are those that move to and fro in the breast. And when you know it's moving to and fro in your breast, you move to what you know is righteous, which you know is right, instead of moving into living with that doubt, knowing that it's something that you need to arrest or deal with. Every human being, especially those people of faith or people who say they believe in faith, faith embodies 3 characteristics: to confess with your tongue, to believe in your heart, and to give evidence in your actions. All 3 of those are necessary in faith itself. So I think that what we cannot take out of this conversation, the human dynamic, human beings. The change and the transformation has to be human transformation. We cannot reach this, like you said, reaching for that higher standard. And so long as we're dealing with folks that are making the decisions that don't have those standards, that don't move or lean into them, it doesn't matter what the system is. It's a dilemma that is a spiritual one because of how we are moving through the world as people. In the faith, it says, not by the force of numbers, not by any organized campaign, no matter how broad its reach. One thing and only thing, one thing can arrest to a skeptical age, and that is the degree to which each of us mirror forth the beliefs that we say we have in our own private lives and character. And if that doesn't happen, I mean, that's the spiritual solution, is a change of hearts. And like I said, it doesn't matter what the system is. If you have people who are not, it's not going to work.
Joy, you speak to this importance of inside-out transformation, transforming the individual, the hearts and minds. It's not enough to just transform the system, or it almost doesn't matter what the system is.
Yeah.
If the individuals within it are not behaving a certain way. Layli, you do a lot of work with organizations in your consultancy, perhaps working within the system, organizations that are for profit. How do you go about infusing a lot of these principles, operationalizing values in organizations which are very profit-seeking?
Yeah, I think I agree with the discourse so far around the important role of the individual in transformation, and I would suggest that it's individual, it's the institution, and it's community, and it's all at the same time. And complexity is hard, and to work at all levels at the same time feels impossible, but it's actually, I think, what we have to do. So take, for example, whether a company or a society values unity. Let's just pretend that's a value that we have, is unity. One of the competencies that feed into unity is the ability to resolve conflict and not backbite about each other. So, if a competency is no backbiting that will lead to unity, it's not enough just to tell an individual, believe that backbiting is bad. It helps. It really helps. It does. And it's helpful to have that personal mindset that backbiting is gossip, speaking badly about people is a horrible thing. But addressing it at the individual level, holding people accountable, having them believe it's bad, but then also having systems of accountability to remind them that it's bad, all that's good. It's all at an individual level, and it won't be sufficient. Because backbiting can be the inevitable outgrowth of injustice. It can be. Can be. Some people just love backbiting for sport. I'm not talking about that. But for some people, backbiting is a desperate response to be heard. And it is a necessary response to unfairness, perceived or real, and maybe a system that isn't fair. So to operationalize the value of unity, we, yes, have to look at the individual. We have to help them understand that it's wrong and it's bad. We have to have systems of accountability. But we also have to have an institutional framework that allows for critique, for feedback, for psychological safety, and for dialogue. And then we have to have community norms that normalize hard conversations, not backbiting, the soft culture stuff of community. So I say it's all three levels, which is harder. It's not capitalism that's bad, and it's capitalism that's bad. It's the individual, it's the institution, and it's the community. But as a general rule, labels, it's not just capitalism.
It's both and.
Yeah.
Saman, you are running your own company at the moment, and there's been a lot of backlash often to the role of AI in terms of job displacement. At the same time, a lot of folks argue that by automating more menial tasks, we can actually free up humans for greater endeavors of creativity, community, connection. How have you responded to some of these conversations as a leader within AI, which somewhat could be the antithesis of spirituality, or some would argue is helping it herald it forward?
Yeah, I think that's a thorny subject, but I think my perspective on it is that if you look at, let's just take, for example, the sciences. If you look at the sciences right now, there are maybe across the entire globe 500 universities where there's a kind of advanced research happening around the sciences. And in those 500 universities, maybe kind of on any given topic, there's maybe 10 or 20 researchers that are working on such a given topic. And so that means, if we're kind of talking about progression in quantum physics or, relativity or, telecommunications or whatever, like there's maybe 10,000, maybe 20,000 people on the planet that are contributing their energy towards that, the advancement of that field. And there's no way that those 20,000 people are the best qualified 20,000 people in the world, right? There's 7 billion people, of which the vast majority are engaged in menial work that doesn't engage their mind, doesn't engage their creativity, and they haven't had the opportunity for education to be able to contribute to those fields. I'm not saying academia is the only way, obviously, to contribute to society. There's hundreds of different fields where if people were able to contribute actively and creatively, we would see such a massive wave of progression in society. So I think that at an abstract and conceptual level, that's how I see it, and I think automation and AI and robotics is helping to unleash. And there's a lot of research and stuff that shows AI and robotics, when they're applied to different industries, that employment rate goes up, worker happiness goes up. So there's research around it, but I think that like these are all kind of theoretical and conceptual, and actually don't really help us on the day-to-day basis. And Joy, you said something backstage, which is the real question is not whether spiritual solutions can solve economic problems. The real question is how do we operationalize it? Like what do we do about it? And so when I think about my experience, if I can kind of go away from my work just for a second, I serve in our town that I live in. There's the city government has something called the Economic Development Board. So I joined that board, and I've been on it for the last 6 years. And that board is their mandate is how do we improve, workforce education? How do we attract businesses? How do we help businesses survive and thrive in this town? And I can tell you, like the entire time I've been there, it feels like the impact that we've had is like, almost negligible. And like there's a lot of people dedicatedly working on that. And then flip side, in the same town, me and my wife and a few other Baha'i friends who live there work actively with the junior youth program, where we're working daily with teenagers between the age of 10 years old and 15. We meet with them, multiple times a week. We know their families, and they are starting to really actively think about what their role is in society. At that age, they're really questioning, how they are meant to contribute, how are they meant to absorb information, how are they meant to react to all these social forces that are influencing them on a daily basis. And as they have gone through this program over the last few years, now many of them have started very actively contributing back to their community. Many of the families, many of these students now, they're tutoring their younger siblings or cousins or neighbors or friends that are 5, 6, 7 years younger than them in math, in reading, in language, multiple times a week of their fully of their own volition. Many of their parents are immigrants who have recently come to the U.S. and don't really speak English, and so they decided on their own accord to start a class, teaching English to their own parents, which is, you can imagine how empowering it is for a 14-year-old to kind of try to teach their parents something. And it's the first time that they've had the courage to do that and had the environment to do that. These are small examples, but recently, like the mayor and somebody from one of the Congress people, sent a representative. They came to this kind of opening of the center that we had, and they said multiple times, like, this is the first time that we really feel a sense of progress coming from within the community, where they themselves are taking control of their own fate. And I think that for me, that's really telling to see the contrast between these two environments, where in one, there's all these, many of them very highly paid people whose only job is to try to promote, economic advancement, and like haven't been able to get anything really meaningful done. And on the other side, a bunch of 14-year-olds, fully on a volunteer basis, have actually been able to really, really change society. And I think it really comes from the fact that they see this as their purpose in their life. Their spiritual education has led them to believe this is the way that they can contribute. And they have also felt like they have the right to contribute. And I think that's, for me, just seeing that contrast is really like the answer to this question.
Neal, I saw you wanting to chime in.
Yeah, I actually wanted to add something to your question, May. I went through the last major, as a child, the last major, the information age, and switching away from farming. So I grew up in a farming community, and my dad owned a farm when we were young, and he lost the farm when I was 5 years old. And there's a lot of consolidation of farming that's happened because of technological developments. And our mother and father taught us we call it the 13th article of faith when we were young, that we believe in being honest, true, chaste, benevolent, virtuous, and in doing good to all men. Indeed, we may say that we follow the admonition of Paul. We believe all things, we hope all things, we have endured many things, and hope to be able to endure all things. If there's anything virtuous, lovely, or of good report, or praiseworthy, we seek after these things. So we had this emblazoned in our mind, huge technological change, and then what did we as brothers do? We went and, instead of farming, started a movie studio company and tried to take those principles to another market, to another thing where we saw a problem broken. Had farming allowed us to sustain our lives, we probably would have been able to make a living, but the change in the world has moved farming to like 1% of the population. And so that we lived that experience, and the blessing of what our parents did and gave to us, the technological change, the combination of technology, faith, and capitalism allowed us to go and do something else that could bless the world. So I just wanted to share that thought in conjunction with AI and how it will open up new opportunities for people.
Yeah, I have a question just about AI in general. I did some work with Sundance, and what Sundance did was they invited 12 of us who were in various fields, to observe some of the technology. And they told us that everything you experience is already 15 years old. So I was in there oohing and ahhing, and they were going, yeah, we're way beyond all that, which was shocking. But one of the things that I noticed, and this is you talked about unity. I really love that, the whole idea of unity. And what we also play with is this notion of diversity and understanding diversity as a spiritual principle, without which we're in deep trouble. And this has to do specifically with, this was literally the strangest thing in the world. I was talking to robots and stuff. It was just, something like in another world. I wasn't used to it, but what they wanted me to do was to take a look at what the technology was doing to find bias, right? So we had a real diverse 12 people in the room looking at different projects and different things that showed up. And before that, they showed us examples of it. And the one that was most striking to me, some of them were, pretty straightforward. An AI that was dealing with passports, and it kept rejecting certain people because they said their eyes were closed, because it hadn't considered Asians, and the eye, the subcutaneous fold. So they would say that their eyes are closed, and they weren't. So those are kind of really straightforward. But there was one, it was a Mercedes, a very high end. The Mercedes was smarter than everybody in this room. And one of the things they programmed the Mercedes to do, and it was, nothing, it was a very expensive car. It was literally like a robot, this Mercedes. And they programmed it to determine whether it would swerve to miss a pedestrian or just try to save the driver, right? So the car has to make a decision about that. And one of the factors was the cost of the car, the ability of the person who's driving it to own the car, and the likelihood that the person that it's going to hit could not afford the car. So I would say, here's the thing. Someone programmed that in. I mean, it didn't just figure that out on its own. Someone figured, well, how are you going to determine whether to swerve to miss a pedestrian who's not likely to be able to afford this car? Those were the moments for me when I was looking at AI and looking, people, we talk about narrative and having our own narrative and putting out there a spiritual narrative. Let me try to explain what I mean by that. If we don't show up in these spaces and say, yeah, that's not okay, right? Somebody has to somehow show up in those spaces and say, well, that's not going to be okay. We can't complain about AI if we're not contributing to the wealth of knowledge that it is grabbing from. If my narrative is not out there, something else is going to write that. As a matter of fact, I check on that all the time. It's very interesting to find out about yourself and what the world feels about you, because it's grabbing from the data that's out there. So we need more people in with respect to the spiritual piece, because here is a car, high-end car, someone's going to buy, right? And we have to be able to infuse out there in AI and into the global world truths that defy some of the information that it's grabbing from. We become our own worst enemies when we don't put the information out there. Once again, we can't be complaining about it if we're not doing something to help enhance it, to guide it. And unfortunately, when you talked about those folks in the room, I don't know how many thousands that are doing that, I'm immediately wondering who's in the room. Who's in the room? It's not putting any shade on the people that are in the room, but do we have all the people in the room that we need to have in that room?
The topic of technology in particular and what it can do to either apply spiritual principles or detract maybe from the problems that we're having. On a positive note, I think, I recently, for a client, was investigating an amazing tool for participatory decision-making at scale. So governments, several governments now, Taiwan, Finland, and a number of others, are using a model that goes beyond voting and beyond polling and allows for complex consultation at scale. So for example, and some of you may be familiar, it was in the press, but there was a government that thought it needed to regulate Uber. Uber had entered the market. There was something on the table politically that would relate to its regulation. They wanted to do essentially what was a lot like a referendum. In the United States, we would have referendums on specific things, but those are very simplistic. People go yes or no. What they decided to do was open it up for community consultation. And so the question, the seed question involved, and they had 5 prompt questions around regulating Uber, but what happened was anyone can respond in any way. So like, I annoyingly didn't really answer your question, yes or no. That's how the community feels about most things that come to it. So as a result of what could have been, like in the United States, probably would have been a yes-no referendum question, they positioned it differently, they framed it differently, and they had technology that allowed for complexity. What resulted was thousands and thousands of people who added a wide range of input, and some of it was random, like, by the way, we need more, she was telling me, Korean fried chicken places. Okay, in the context of the Uber, but actually she said that was so statistically significant that the government ended up addressing that issue. It was very interesting. But because people just felt like, here's a place to say it. But what they found was that there were very serious safety concerns that Uber had opened up, but that applied even more to the taxi industry. And they realized there was a broader suite or menu of regulations that were needed, and there were issues they were unaware of, particularly having to do with the safety of women. They wouldn't have had that without some frame for consultative dialogue, imperfect, I'm sure, but that technology allowed beyond an old model of referendum. So there's some cool stuff that might be possible, particularly around applying spiritual principles to economic problems.
I love this example because it hits the nail on the head in terms of technology as a tool, not as an end itself or a means. I think you've talked about this publicly as well, about AI being a means, not an end, and when used well, can actually help us infuse some of these spiritual principles into our institutions. I'd like to shift gears before we open it up to the audience, and also audience, if you have your questions, please get them ready. We're going to open up soon. Moving into some practicalities and continuing this conversation around the different agents of change, whether it's individuals, community, and at an institutional level. We have in this room many folks who run their own organizations, business leaders, entrepreneurs. What is one practical action that as a leader we can take in our organizations to bring an element of spiritual principles or a particular spiritual principle to life? And it could be something that you're doing in your own organizations or that's perhaps a low-hanging fruit. Neal, maybe handing it off to you. I know that you running Angel Studios as well, going public soon. I'm imagining kind of the way that you're thinking about the internal operations of the company. There are many principles that perhaps are already in place, and some of what you referred to in terms of your upbringing and childhood that you've infused in. Would love to hear, one, say, practical example you're using internally that might apply to some of the other leaders in the room here.
I had the most wonderful meditation session this morning for an hour, and the guide did such a wonderful job, and afterwards went for a walk with a couple of other fellow attendees, and we walked down to the pier and back and just talked. I think that connecting to God through scripture, through meditation, through prayer and centering yourself as you start the day is probably, when I have a bad day or get off track, I find that it's because I've forgotten that. And so just recentering myself is probably the most important thing for me to do, not only for the company, but especially for my own family. And anytime that I put God first, I feel like he helps me know what or whom to put next. So that's my thought.
My thought is, I mean, I was immediately trying to frame it in a way that made sense for folks, but I work with kind of a collective in terms of community. I have Be the Healing, which is my private nonprofit, and we do symposiums. We have partners like, Organic Oneness and Forefathers that's here, a variety of different people that kind of are a part of it. One of the things that we've employed in our work is called empathy interviews. And empathy interviews, we're trying to find out information, and this again has to do with technology. We can, there's the forms where you can plug in yes or no, or check the boxes, or that sort of thing. You ask someone, well, how do you feel about this? And it's a Likert scale, and they pick 5, so it's meaningless, right? It's just, that kind of middle space. But what we learned and what we discovered, how important it is, once again, it's a different way of gathering data. And this was a real life situation. A principal of an elementary school that my grandchildren were going to, they said, Black parents don't care about their kids. They're not showing up to teacher-parent meetings. Back to school night, they're not coming. This is what the teachers were telling the principal. And so my grandkids were there, and some of their friends, and adults who were saying, wait a minute, we are participating. What are you saying? So they went to the principal and they said, could we do a study? Can we do a study? And the first thing we want to do is to reframe what you consider the problem. First of all, you're blaming the very people you want to be there. You're making it them the problem, and that's not appropriate. You can say that we're not getting participation of all parents at back to school night. And then you're not saying you're bad or pointing fingers. And then what my daughter did was she and her friends started to gather the data. And the first thing they did was they went to the people that they wanted to be at the school, and they said, why do you think a parent may or may not, want to come to back to school night? Parent goes, well, I'm just really busy. Oh, so if you weren't busy. Well, I don't always have transportation. So if you had transportation, you could, and you weren't so busy. Yeah, then I don't have childcare, and she goes, okay, so if you had childcare, you weren't busy, and she said, I don't feel welcome in that school. Root cause analysis. The root cause of it wasn't any of those things. And she said, oh, I'm so sorry that happened for you. Why, tell me about a time when you felt welcome. Well, when I went to my religious organization, my church, or they said, hey, how you doing? And people greeted me and they treated me kindly. Okay. So tell me about a time when you didn't feel like you were. Well, when I walk in the school and nobody says hello and they don't know my son's name, and they're telling me what he did wrong, and all of these are data points. All of these are data points. Long story short, all of those parents, the first session was just a gripe. They were just mad at everybody. And she called it Black Parent Night. That's what it's called, Black Parent Night. And so what happened is these parents started coming together. The principal started making certain that the teachers were touching base. Don't wait till the teacher-parent meeting and say, your son hasn't been doing anything all year. Then what am I going to do, right? So he started putting part of their performance review. How quickly, how soon are you getting engaged with parents? Next thing you know, little postcards are going out during the summer. Come to our ice cream social. Come look and see where your desk is. They closed the achievement gap 18 points, and that wasn't the goal. It's still going on, Black Parent Night, they're still going on, and what's happening, they're doing figuring out how can I own a house, how can I start dealing with finances, how can they have equity and justice. All of this stuff happened because of an empathy interview, not the check mark. When you ask a person, when you talk to them, you're still collecting data, but it's really infusing that connection, that unity that you're talking about, where I'm being present with you as opposed to analyzing you or blaming you, right? Incredible, it's still going on years afterwards, right?
So that's an incredible example, not just of empathy, but also, hearing that curiosity, understanding, also innovation and adaptability in terms of the institution and how they responded, right. Going back to community and the point that was made earlier around the importance of not just the individual and community. and sustainability of the solution. Because I think this point was made earlier, we can have these bespoke or ad hoc solutions, but do they sustain over time? Layli and Saman, what about you? What's one action or one principle that you would recommend to the leaders in this room?
Say what you actually mean, and then actually mean what you say. I think that values are very easy to go into glossy PR manuals. They are easy to say, but they're less easy to do, and people don't even know what you mean. So for example, trust. Trust is a really common value. It's something that we probably all aspire to, but the data shows that what trust actually looks like is going to vary greatly depending on whether you're 60 years old or you're 16 years old. So 60-year-olds would believe that trust is manifested by doing what you said you were going to do and getting like enough information from management to give you a pretty basic sense of why a decision was made. 16-year-olds need much more disclosure. They want to know your life story, your identity. They got to know the background, the why, and the how in order to accept the what. And trust means something very, very different to them. And so at the Tahirih Justice Center, where I was CEO for 20 years, we were noticing that staff were throwing around the word trust a lot. And everyone was nodding and saying, oh yeah, trust, but they weren't feeling trustful about the same thing. So we ended up doing a survey where we asked all of the staff, what level of transparency and disclosure do you really need about decisions to trust it? And we were shocked by the results. What shocked us was the difference. A huge proportion of the staff only wanted high level, and then another proportion wanted an astronomical amount of detail. And then we used that in order to come up with a common definition of trust that we had to say out loud, that people had to buy into, that was beyond what you learned in your family or what you learned in your culture or on TikTok. And so what do you really mean when you say words? But then actually mean what you say. So if there isn't that level of transparency about decisions, for example, when you've said now this is what trust will look like, who's held accountable? Is there feedback? And are you really doing it? So I would just say really, really what you mean, and then actually mean what you say.
It's almost like taking values away from just being sexy buzzwords that we put on a poster to actually operating principles, but being on the same page about what those operating principles actually mean. Thank you for that example. And Saman.
I think maybe I have a little bit of a more cynical answer than most on this stage.
And let's end on that note.
Sorry.
Cynical.
I just think that, like societal organizations, really the amount of impact that we can have on the way that an individual person thinks is so minimal. Like you already pre-screened for the people to be part of that organization that already kind of agree with you. So like, yeah, like I feel like, in our company, of course, like we do things where we try to kind of poke around the edges and try to encourage people to think a certain way or act a certain way or at least communicate a certain way. But when I reflect back on where I've seen kind of genuine change, like in the neighborhood work that we do with these teenagers, for example, like it took 10 years of kind of sustained work and really understanding, the entire context of their family life and their school life and, helping them think through exams, like every single little detail over and over and over again before finally, after 10 years, we're able to see change in the way that people think about their problems and how they think about spirituality as part of the answer to those problems. And so I think at the beginning of the panel, I think both of you had mentioned really changes at the level of the individual. And I think that's something I see a lot in the organizational side as well. It's like until you can have the change at the level of the individual, like organizational change really doesn't do much good.
But consistency, which you brought out, that consistently not letting go of that and keeping your eye on that. I mean, that's a real critical piece. The fact that you did it 10 years,
Incredible conversation, which we'd love to continue. And now is the time for audience questions. If you have a question, please raise your hands and we'll get you a roaming microphone. And I'd invite you to perhaps just state your name and your question if it's for the whole panel or a particular panelist. Don't all jump out at once. We've got one over here. Any other questions? Get some microphones over to you while we're waiting. Start with this one.
Here we go. Hello, so my name is Patrick Shaw. I'm the executive director and founder of Four Fathers. My question is for Layli. Having the attorney background, the legality of how companies operate, do you see yourself or people with your background trying to find that way of infusing the virtues over the legality and the principles that companies may be adopting?
So if I'm understanding your question, are you suggesting that the law is not always in alignment with values?
Absolutely, because slavery was legal.
Yeah. The law reflects the values of the people who wrote them, absolutely, at any given time. And as we have been talking about the answer to solving economic problems or really any problems, lies at the individual and at the system and at the community level. Laws are a really beautiful manifestation of all of it. And so I think that we can't hold law holy because it's not. It was written by humans, it was written by flawed people, it was written by biased people, and it was written by people who wanted to advantage themselves at the end of the day with the laws that were being set up. So what do we do when we're in that system? I think that we respect it and we fight it all at the same time. I know that seems maybe contrary to each other, but I really believe it can be done. I think that you can walk into court and abide by the rules of the court and change the law. We've done that. Lots of people here have done that. And many people here have done that, not with the law, but with systems, with the way profit is made, with the way real estate is developed, with regard to the way healthcare is administered. We can all do that. So there is an incongruence, I agree with it, but I think that the way that we shift and we transform has to do with alignment and coherence in who we are as individuals and what we strive to make our systems to look like and what we want our communities to be.
Any other questions? Got one over here. And then one
Yes,
over here.
hi. My name is Igor Kuzin. I'm a CEO 5 times and professor of entrepreneurship at the University of Pennsylvania. I want to maybe say that in my work, I see a huge impact from creating environments that then drive individual change. So we often talk about individuals changing first. And our work with organizations in creating what we call the space between shows that actually, and I would almost bet, how many of you are behaving somewhat differently during these 2 days than you usually behave? Just raise it up high. So there's at least a number of you. And that's because we're in an environment, a space that was created with certain principles. So if we create environments that are different and that are healthier, the individuals change. So maybe this is somewhat contradicting what Saman is saying, but we see that time and again, that as soon as you bring the space between into the conscious operation of an organization, not a byproduct of it, not a weekend retreat, not a time has come to build a culture, let's do it. As soon as you do it on a consistent basis, it always, 100% of the time changes individuals. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, the question is how. So you haven't talked too much about, and this is the question now, you haven't talked too much about the role of leaders. So you've spoken about individual, institutional, community. Layli mentioned this triad. What we see is that the incredibly high role in transforming individuals through the space between lies with leadership. What can you say about that? We'd be very interested to hear what you think about it.
So the role of leadership in infusing spiritual principles.
First of all, I loved what you said in terms of changing the environment. One of my mentors in my book, Randall Robinson, talked about the problem with leadership, and I really agree with him. He says, so many leaders came to do good, but stayed to do well. And they lost the vision of the essential mission. And I think that a lot of leaders right now, first of all, I think we need, and we talked about this in the back as well, we need young people in this room. We need the folks we're passing the baton to in this room. And they rarely are, those people that are in this room. There are a few, but we need a room full of them because they're the ones we're passing it to. In terms of what the role of a leader is, it is to, in fact, hear and see and feel the vision of the people that you are serving, hear their voices, engage them in, again, a co-creation of what it is you're trying to produce, no matter what it is. A perfect example of this, I did some work I actually still do work for an organization that works with adjudicated youth and their families. And the goal is to these kids that have, petty theft or they've done something, that isn't a felony. We don't want them to end up in the adult system. These are black and brown kids. And I spoke with him. He spoke to me about what I thought needed to happen. I said, well, as a leader, I said, I know this is probably not. I said, but I think you should bring virtues training into this organization. He had no idea what virtues training. And Counselor Nwandi Lawson was actually the person hired to come in to do virtues training. Now, anybody that doesn't know what that is, it's really taking and operationalizing virtues, especially for this population of folks. But this leader not only made it mandatory that the organization all be trained in virtues, but to begin to utilize them in our different spaces. Let me explain how that showed up. So how many people have done virtues cards? Have virtues cards, okay? But I have them with me. I keep them with me everywhere I go. It's all of these different virtues: kindness, patience, love, mercy, forgiveness. There's a whole lot of them. Blind pick, everyone has to pick a card. This is how people introduce themselves. My name is so-and-so, here's what I do. Here is my virtue, here is how that virtue speaks to me today. That's literally how we use the virtues. Some of the staff was pushing back. They didn't get it. Listen, I'm working with these knucklehead kids, and I don't know how the virtues are going to work. And Nwandi was so perfect to be there because, she just beams hope and passion and all of this. So anyway, what happens, they do a blind pick, so we spread out the cards and you pick it. This was just the parents and their children. That's the only people in the room that are getting the training this day, and I was there. And I had to actually, organize it and facilitate it. Boy walks in, young man walks in with his father. His father goes to one side of the room. He comes to this side of the room, sits right in front of me, puts his headphones on and his hoodie, and sits back. So, again, I'm the one who recommended the virtues. You got to understand, to this leader of this organization that said, we're going to all do it. I don't care what you say. So what happens is I say to the young man, we're going to be 45 minutes. You think you can take the headphones off and listen just for 45 minutes? And he said, yes. So they went around the entire room, each parent, child, here's my virtue, here's how it speaks to me today. He was one of the last ones to speak, and he was one of the few that stood up. He stood up, took his hood off, and said, I chose the virtue of courage. And I have to have the courage to believe that this next alternative school that I go to, because he'd been to 2 already, will see the new me and not judge me on who I used to be. I have to have the courage to believe that even though I have had all of these problems, that people will see that I can be different. This is what this kid is saying. His father runs across the room, bursts into tears, and hugs his son. That was one virtues card that did that. And what I realized about this leader who made that mandatory, is that he trusted the process itself. And maybe it wouldn't work, but it did work, and they're still using the virtues. They have their whole new training that they're doing. It has nothing to do with me. But a leader that stands and recognizes that you have to, and again, mandatory. No adult wants the word mandatory on anything. But the virtues have become a natural part of this organization now, because that leader had that vision and was willing to take all the pushback that he got. And wonderful results have happened.
That's a beautiful example. I'd love to open up for the other panelists as well, if you have any contrasting or kind of complementary perspectives on the role of leadership.
I would just add to this idea that a combination of your idea of say what you mean and mean what you say is that a lot of people say at Angel that really the culture reflects the leader and who the leader is and the leader's culture. And so if I give a card and give a virtue, that can help somebody go through the process themselves. But if I actually am striving to achieve that virtue as well, and the people I'm working with see me strive for change, then they are more likely to want to change. And if I see, and I've seen a lot of negative things about Angel that tie back to a weakness that I have, then I need to, as a leader, be the one who steps up first to make that change rather than just ask the team to make the change.
It is well said already, and perhaps obvious that leaders must model the values, and they are the biggest lever for implementing values at the individual and at the institutional and at the community level. I think that what I'm grappling with is how imperfect we all are. And even leaders with strong values, even leaders with good intentions are flawed. And we lack self-perception, even if we've been in therapy. Like no amount of, even good people around you or therapy or whatever it is will make you perfectly able to see how you land in every situation, will make you aware of your flaws. And so I think that for leaders to do well by modeling values, they mostly need to be open to feedback and design it and invite it and require it and be open to it and see any amount of even crazy as a gift and an opportunity to just even know that that perspective is out there. At the Tahiri Justice Center, at its peak, we had 120 staff, and we had 360 evaluations. So I was evaluated by nearly everybody. My last evaluation, and Paul Glist, who might be here, wrote a lot of my evaluations as the former chair of the board. My last evaluation was 68 pages long. And I heard things that were great, that helped me keep going, that were compliments, that allowed me to know what I was doing well. And I heard things that didn't land well, that hurt my feelings, because I had tried really hard on the thing, and I thought I was doing the thing, but they didn't think I was doing the thing. And it's all important, and it's all good. And so again, with the spirit of trying to mean what we say and do, what we mean and all of that, I feel like the key to it is accountability or feedback and just being really open to any of it, even if it hurts, even if we don't feel like it's accurate.
In that, I hear, as leaders, we are perfectly imperfect, and we need to embrace our humanity. And I think the example you give, Layli, speaks to the courage to also step up and acknowledge we don't have it all figured out, and that we often do make mistakes, but it's in the taking of accountability and being transparent and vulnerable around that that's perhaps more important than always getting it right. We have time for one more question before we wrap up. I know there's quite a few hands. We'll go with you, sir.
Hi, how are you? My name's Nicolas Peralta. I'm a student. So my question is, I have a couple of questions, but I'm just gonna keep it to one because in my mind, I've been thinking a lot. But Abdul Baha used to go up to people and instead of, I mean, he would ask them how you were and stuff, but he would always ask, are you happy? So my question is to all of you guys is, are you happy? And then how do you, if you are, or whatever your answer is, like, how does that relate to like your life or whatnot? Like, how do you stay happy? How do you be happy? How do you, yeah, and maybe just talk a little bit about what your relationship with like God is, and then that is a correlation with you being happy.
Maybe 20 seconds each. I want to challenge you. Whoever would like to kick it off, yeah.
I'll go first because you mentioned my comment. I am happy, not all the time, but I am happy as a rule, and I find that I can remain happy by playing basketball a few times a week, by reading and studying to get new ideas in my head, by improving my relationships with other people and with God. If I focus on those 4 things, then it helps me stay happy.
Someone?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely I feel happy, not all the time. And I was reflecting with my wife recently about this exact question when we were arguing about something, and then afterwards we're like, but, I think it's through the challenges, like the most difficult, most busy, most complicated times. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and like there's 10 million and a half things that I have to think about with them. I have to think about my company, I have to think about my community, think about my marriage. Like all of these things are, in a way, things that are pushing me and forcing me to grow. But I think it's in that process of struggle that the joy comes.
There's a saying that says we are only as happy as our unhappiest child. And I have 3, and so I'm always like, who's not happy right now? And right this minute, all 3 of them are actually happy. So right now, I'm really, really happy. That's what I'll say. But that could change, like, in a minute.
I love that. Joy?
I am happy. And my name, Joy. I try to exemplify that name. And what makes me happy, and there are people in the audience that know that my favorite thing in life to do, fishing. That's right. It's fishing. I was just at a gig in Oregon in the boonies. It was, out there in the boonies. And I ended up going fishing with the guy who hired me to be there. And I told him, I said, next year I will cut back the amount you pay me if you take me fishing, right? When we were fishing, we just had such a great time. So fishing, gardening, and giving, believe it or not. Giving. I love making, not necessarily really expensive things, but making special gifts for people and knowing how it's going to warm their heart. I love that. I absolutely love that. It makes me very happy. And I'm, in general, a happy person, although I'm intense. I can be intense.
A round of applause for our happy answers. I would say one thing that's made me really happy is being able to hear such incredible conversation on a topic that we don't often get to hear about, that leaves us with some hope and idealism around how we can, as individuals, as community, as institutions, and as our businesses, really bring some of the spiritual values to life. And that perhaps we don't need to overthrow capitalism, but that we can bring to life some of the things that are most important to us in the day-to-day work that we're doing.
Think of sharing what you know.